I'm not gonna lie, this season was disappointing as hell, which is, spoilers I guess, also great way to kick off a season review, right? Yeah, if you watch enough seasonal anime, that's really not a huge surprise, but I was seriously struggling to find the good in the shows I ended up watching. It's pretty damn sad when a season so full of potential I was somewhat optimistic about at the start ended up predictably bland, where my top spots were dominated by season 2s and the most obvious choices. But hey, maybe there's a surprise in there. Yeah, I'm aware I didn't watch everything. There's over 50 anime out a season these days, and these are what caught my eye, or what my Patreon supporters voted for too. Want to influence what I watch next season? Toss me $1 on Patreon or YouTube memberships and you'll get a say. Other than that, go ahead and hit the subscribe button to stay up to date on my seasonal reviews. Let's get on into it. Yeah, it's not much of a spoiler based on what I looked at in my season preview, but the good shows this season were dominated by season 2s and some really big standouts. A lot of these had a leg up on the simple fact they were continuations of shows I've already recommended. But whatever, let's see what I thought of the cream of the crop this time around. Is there a world where someone not being a contrarian douche didn't rank solo leveling among their top shows this season? Yeah, I might be a douche, but I'm anything but contrarian. So what made season 2 of the hit manhwa adaptation so good? Well, basically continuing to deliver on the promises made by season 1 of awesome fight scenes animated well and distilled hype drip-fed to the audience on a weekly basis. Enough that about halfway through this season, I decided to binge the manhwa myself. And I kinda get some of the criticism from fans. A lot of the humor in this is cut to streamline the process, while still keeping Jinwoo a badass. But mainly the anime, while looking nice, I will give it that, just doesn't hold a candle to the manhwa's art. But I can't really imagine anyone saying that in earnest. You can't maintain that quality throughout an entire anime runtime. Like, you're comparing apples to oranges there. And let's not gloss over how the adaptation this season puts Japan in a not so bad light, which is pretty damn insensitive from a historical perspective for Korea. In the end, the anime still does an excellent job conveying the core story though. And I really like the fact that this season allowed Jinwoo the chance to become deeper than just a badass, by finally tackling his relationship with his family. Dude finally accomplished the goal he set out for when becoming a hunter, and now he's faced with the choice between fighting and just living a normal life. I like that sort of reflection, because it brings depth to a series severely lacking in it. If you watch anime for fights, Solo Leveling is right up your alley, as it's not just a really good action series, it's a solid example of a power fantasy done well. I really struggled with how highly to rank Zenshu, at least after I got over the frustration of the surprise isekai rug pull. But after letting this one simmer, I came to see what they were going for. This isn't your typical isekai. The world being that of an anime that's important to the lead and essentially inspired her to become an animator in the first place, but toying with the idea of whether it's real, a hallucination, or she was somehow transported into the movie itself, creates a lot of intrigue I wasn't expecting. Natsuko is working through a lot of her own emotional baggage, but not in a ham-fisted way. Her struggles and lessons learned throughout this anime relate to her career and an ultimate way forward for her as a person, as she comes to rely on others and even find out about love. Kind of important for her current project, right? Then there's that aspect that this world ultimately can't escape the script written for it, even if characters and people change. But you know, Natsuko can't help but want to fix her beloved but flawed anime she obsessed over as a kid. And hey, the title is Zenshu, literally meaning to fix or start over in a creative sense. There's a lot thematically in this anime that works, and I definitely see the pieces, but I won't say it handles them the best. The middle is a little slow, and a lot of the interpretation piecing this together throughout the series is left on the audience. However, if you're willing to engage, it's honestly a creative take on the genre that got a beautiful and quirky treatment, making for an overall charming experience. Zenshu grew on me over the course of this season, and I'm honestly a little surprised by that. Considering I ranked the first season of My Happy Marriage so high, there should have been little doubt that season 2 met my expectations. This is still a sweet romance series that sees a little progress, tells a neat alt history period piece with fantasy elements, and mixes that with personal and political drama to keep the stakes high for the entire cast. In terms of story, it's engaging throughout, though I will say, I have some issues with Mio, as she's treated with kid's gloves this season by pretty much everyone. Don't get me wrong, she does have some character growth, and moves from barely better than an object being acted upon in the narrative to a person with actual agency. There's an escalation of stakes as well, with the introduction of a cult of sorts, posing a tangible threat to the citizens that actually carries the whole season. But while that's a nice change of pace, it sort of feels like the story lost a lot of the intrigue by essentially telling us who Mio really is and what her powers are. Yusuba Mystery did a lot of legwork in the first season, and this one's Gifted Communion plot isn't really doing it in the same way. That said, it's still a nicely animated, artistically driven series with a lot to offer, from action, romance, and hints of fantasy, so definitely worth checking out. Yeah, I'm aware, I've been down on Villainess anime lately, so imagine my surprise when From Bureaucrat to Villainess blew its competition out of the water. It's essentially become my yardstick for the genre. I think the reason being, it's not like any of the other Villainous properties out. And surprisingly, that has little to do with the gimmick of a middle-aged man getting put into a video game. This anime uses the premise excellently, by playing off the dude's experience and dad vibes as he accidentally puts the entire population on his route by just being normal. I appreciate the lower stakes and practically slice-of-life approach to the story being told. It's small, but the dude adjusts to his new life, and his family back home isn't exactly forgotten about either, as they're watching the story unfold on the game console his daughter owns, even having them help at times. It creates a wholesome but fun experience, as the comedy isn't just self-referential or parody stuff, but pretty damn relatable and light societal commentary spiced in, with a genuinely good-hearted view of the world. As for the animation here, Ajiado did a nice job creating a series that's bright and energetic. I really appreciate the amount of small detail they put into animating what could have easily been dull shots of people talking, or when they just go all out for a brief moment to amp up a scene. That makes this such a fun watch. And that's not even commenting on the ending. Holy shit, I couldn't skip that even if I wanted to. The staff here clearly enjoyed working on this series, and it shows. This was just a well put together package with an above average take on a fairly tired premise at this point, so it stood out. Yeah, another case where Season 2 dominated my top rankings, and zero surprises, Apothecary Diaries is among them. If you watch enough seasonal anime, you're gonna get exhausted by the trends. Fantasy and Isekai are fucking killing me at this point. Anything that's not those, I'm on board with. So the fact a historical drama mystery got such a good anime treatment gives it a massive leg up. Yeah, anything competently done against current industry trends stands out. But that's not solely why Apothecary Diaries ranks among my top anime for winter 2025. Trust me, if it was, I'd be pretty upfront about that. No, this series does an excellent job weaving slice-of-life storytelling, mystery of the week elements, and creating an overarching narrative that ties all the plot threads we see come up in each mini-arc together, while building a memorable romance between Jinshi and Mao Mao. And as someone who harps about plot and story endlessly, the fact that such a piecemeal series keeps me engaged should speak volumes. And tying that package together is some nice looking animation that's solid throughout. Though, don't get me wrong, it's not blowing me away on a weekly basis, but when it fucking tries, it goes all out. The style and art is incredibly consistent and nice looking, and I'm comfortable saying it's good even. Look, I'm here for the slower building story, and pretty much anything that isn't fantasy or isekai at this point, so Apothecary Diaries has my full attention. Here's hoping the second core can keep up this quality. In another case of no surprises, Sakamoto Days was another top pick for me. Yeah, an incredibly popular Shonen Jump franchise manages to get a good anime adaptation. Stop the fucking presses. Okay, I'm not dropping to my knees and sucking this off as the best anime of the year or anything, but Sakamoto Days is a fun anime that packs some slick action and decent comedy into a package that's easily accessible. The story isn't complex, the characters aren't deep, and it's goofy enough that the out there humor and action mesh well with the setting. Sakamoto himself makes for an above average protagonist with a good mix of stoic badass and fat jokes, keeping him firmly in the gag character bucket. Until he sheds some weight, of course, in which case he's just pure badass. Yeah, don't question where his mustache goes, it must get absorbed. But what's probably the biggest sticking point is this anime isn't pretty. Like, the characters almost have a stereotypical Shonen Jump design, with a fairly ugly, grainy texture overlay that stands out enough that you're aware of its existence, but not so much that it's distracting. There were choices made in the production here that I feel hampers the end product, but ultimately I enjoyed what we got. A good mix of comedy and action. Though whether it's better than any of the other in the retired assassin genre, I'm not so convinced. Either way, it's a good entry point for the series. Honestly, I'm surprised the second season of Toilet Bound Hanako-kun maintained its quality after so long. Usually after such a big gap, voice actors are replaced, studios get changed, and entirely new staff come on board. But we didn't see that here despite this taking 5 years to manifest. This is a series that skirts the line between comedy and horror well, to the point that it does both within the same episode seamlessly. Big bonus, it doesn't rely on gore and cheap jump scares to convey that. As the backdrop to that, we've got an intricate storyline playing out as the balance of power shifts for the spiritual side of the school, and our main character's life is on the line for not just drama, but a varied set of arcs that keep the audience engaged. The core cast is set, but what they're going to be dealing with is pretty much up in the air. Between tricks with time, visits to the afterlife, and even completely fabricated realities that pit friends against one another, I've been meaning to read the manga for this series, and after this season, I'm going to. Toilet-bound Hanako-kun is basically the sort of series that keeps me coming back to anime each season. A show that hits the gamut of emotions, has an engaging story, and tells it in such an incredibly unique and stylized way that I'm hooked. I'm not just happy to see that this is back, I'm thrilled that it has the same vibe. If you enjoyed the first season, you'll have no issue jumping into the second. 2025 apparently kicked this year off with the season 2 domination streak, because 100 Girlfriends also ranked highly again. Who could have seen that coming? Yeah, a series that basically takes the harem genre to such an absurd extreme, it works as both a love letter and parody of the idea. After getting 6 girls to be his girlfriend, you would assume that the joke is running thin at this point, but as this season quickly establishes, Rentaro's love life is only getting more absurd, as the number and quirkiness of his girlfriends explodes. Yeah, we've got 5 more girls this season, and I'm more impressed that the overlap in personalities actually works to amplify the reactions and jokes, as the interplay between girls is now an equal source of comedy to the crazy situations, and Rentaro actually wooing them. That defined by one trait gimmick is a lie, because the relationships here show these girls work well as friends with one another, as well as Rentaro's girlfriend. How fast and loose this series flies with its humor makes it such a standout in the comedy genre, that I don't think I could give a full breakdown on how varied its jokes are. From parody, reference, fourth wall, situational, pun, there's a style of humor for everyone that at least some of the jokes each episode will land. But the biggest turnoff for the average viewer will likely be the amount of ecchi in this anime. Yeah, it's there, and I'm typically one to bemoan that. Hell, if you're watching this as a full video and not as a short, give it time. I'll be bitching about that later. But even the overly fanservice-y stuff in this anime is part of the joke lambasting the genre. For animation, a series like this easily could have gotten away with phoning it in, but I'm incredibly happy with how expressive and bombastic the animation is, committing to the jokes and selling every punchline like their lives depend on it. 100 Girlfriends is a riot, and one that had me laughing out loud each week, so obviously I'm recommending it. And with that, we've made it to the middle of the pack. These are the shows I still found enjoyable to watch, but they definitely weren't my favorite this season. Probably because they had a flaw holding them back from greatness. Not to say there is no value here. These are just my conditional recommendations, so let's see if any of these pique your interest. Yeah, possibly the greatest Alchemist of all time didn't really fit anywhere else besides middle of the road. There's not much that really stands out about this anime, to the point it's hard to even talk about. This has your typical isekai setup of a dude going to another world where God feels bad about getting him involved and gives him OP powers as a result to make up for this mistake. So what does he want to do with his newfound life and younger body? Live a peaceful one as a craftsman, obviously, which is pretty much the go-to profession for every isekai protag these days. Well, either that or merchant, except, you know, this is an isekai. So obviously he gets pulled into becoming an adventurer, reinvents a lot of modern amenities that make him a huge deal, and impresses pretty much everyone around him on a daily basis. But that's not all. We've got a harem of slave waifus the series goes out of its way to assure us is an ethical practice with zero abuse. No, really. Please don't look at the slaves obviously abused by the human supremacist evil empire. That's how you're supposed to know they're evil. They mistreat their slaves. Aside from the poorly written tropes, one-dimensional characters, bad implications, and kindergarten storybook tier morals, this anime is fine. Yeah, I know that sounds like I just listed a lot wrong with it, but honestly that just kinda boils down to mediocre writing. If being generic was a sin, pretty much every fantasy and isekai would fail. Here, instead, we just have another in a long line of dude becoming the main character of the world plots. The art, animation, and action are all serviceable, and while not memorable, there's definitely a market for anime that's basically exactly like another you've seen before. And for people who are connoisseurs of isekai, this certainly would be another one to binge. That's about all I can say. Isekai is so ubiquitous these days that most rarely stand out, but Headhunted to Another World did the impossible, and actually had a somewhat unique premise. The idea of a salaryman going to a fantasy world where he's offered a job to lead the Demon Lord's army because his actual business talents from back on Earth was recognized as useful, and him being put in charge of logistics and management is honestly kinda neat. That's pretty much the whole plot though, as the dude goes around solving whatever problems crop up around the newly established Demon Lord's empire. However, while I'm praising the novelty of this premise, the execution does leave a lot to be desired. The dude racking his brains to fix food shortages and money problems is great on paper, but in practice, really just amounts to a lot of talking, him slipping into his happy place where he comes up with a solution, and then things just kinda fall into place. It's formulaic and the stakes never really feel tangible, as even when he does face setbacks, the answer is always just relying on his companions for help, and then hand-waving away most solutions with his business expertise also feels pretty lazy at the end of the day. But what probably held this back the most was the totally boring presentation with minimalistic modern animation and noticeable corners cut in the production itself. It left what's an otherwise fun and lighthearted anime feeling lackluster. But hey, for an isekai that's being experimental, I'll take it over the generic otaku becoming a hero any day of the week. I just wished it capitalized on what it presented more. I have to hand it to Project Number 9 for not completely dropping the ball with Dr. Detective this season, but that also didn't save it from ending up as a middle-of-the-road anime. Yeah, it's unlike pretty much anything out this season, but there's a distinct issue hanging over this one. Well, aside from the erratic release schedule, the little arcs are pretty hit or miss, and there's no overarching story to keep me coming back each week. I would have loved something about her family that owns the hospital cracking down on her little experimental department, or I don't know, try and tie in the detectives she works with or something, but instead, it's just the usual genius doctor bullshit where the pieces get laid out, and then some obscure trivia the doctor knows because she's a genius clicks, and then everything suddenly makes sense. Which really just makes the medical cases feel like assholes. But that's just my minor gripe about how this series writes its genius. As for what we actually get, the characters have a fun back and forth, and when the mysteries are good, they're actually engaging. And while the genius aspect might not be the best written, Hamaku is surprisingly human. It makes for a strong emotional connection to her patients. At least when they put in the effort to do so. So really, what holds this one back for me is probably the swing and writing quality, but for what amounts to a Western primetime medical drama in anime form, it's actually better than I expected, as all the issues I pointed out plague the genre it's aping as well. Perhaps I was a bit too hard on I'm getting married to a girl I hate in my class in my preview, but it's still a middle-of-the-road show. My biggest complaint in the first episode was Akane was unlikable. As it goes on, she becomes a pretty good tsundere type, and by goes on, I mean like episode 2. So the two leads do get a solid back and forth that keeps their weird relationship in a perpetual state of hot and cold. Normally that would get old pretty quickly, but that directly plays off their school lives creating tension. There's obviously some relationship polygon bullshit going on, as there always is in rom-coms, but I actually like the rivals in this series, due to how their introduction tips the balance in Saito and Akane's relationship in turn. It either advances it, or highlights character flaws for them to work on. That's better writing than I expected. So why did I say it's middling if I'm glazing it so much? My issue comes in with the presentation. The studio is trying, but whether it's because of time or budget, I'm not sure which, they did have to cut some corners. The sheer abuse of cuts to chibi animation to save work is intrusive, and it's not always emphasizing a joke or emotion. Hell, because it's easier to animate, it becomes a crutch for the slapstick, and that definitely hurts this series. And when you're up against 100 Girlfriends this season, it really stands out. If you're into rom-coms, this is a solid choice, but it's definitely not wowing me. There were better choices this season. Goddamn, I Want to Escape Princess Lessons caught some flack this season, and I do sort of get it, which is why I'm placing it as just an okay show. When dealing with the premise that a girl hates her etiquette lessons enough that she repeatedly tries to run away and shows zero interest in her prince fiancé, but he keeps dragging her back, you're bound to not like the guy in question. However, you know, it's a period piece, and consent wasn't invented until second wave feminism. It's about 300 years away from that. Joking aside, Clark takes entirely too long to like him as a character, and the fact that Letty doesn't show any interest in him until the end of the series is a failure on the anime staff. They're adapting this series, and part of their job is to recognize issues like that and make adjustments to the story. So acknowledging those issues, their relationship does get sweet later on. Especially as we see they were much closer in their youth. But my biggest highlight and why I kept watching was the goofball slapstick humor and fourth wall breaks. Letty is a massive bright spot in this anime, as both her personality and initiative make her a likable protagonist that I root for. The comedy just works better than the romance. As for the animation, don't expect a ton. It's not the worst, but the background art is nicer looking than the actual animation itself. This was definitely a budget sort of show, but I didn't find that fact as distracting as other anime in winter. If you're looking for a silly period piece rom-com, this was worth checking out. Wow, I really struggled where to put Honey Lemon Soda this season, as at points I was genuinely impressed with the characters. In others, the writing quality was so poor, I was just shocked, which basically explains why I split the difference and just decided it was okay. Always go with the safe opinion when you're reviewing, right? That's how you make waves. Uka's relationship to Kai and Serena give an interesting twist on the high school romance genre. Like, Kai is a supportive kind of asshole who pushes Uka to be true to her desires and just grow a spine. So, honestly, good for her. And there's Serena being a supportive rival with one of the best takes I've seen in a series geared at young women. That a good relationship is one where the people in it are better as a result. That really impressed me. But on the flip side of that, there's a sense that the narrative treats Uka with kids' gloves. She was bullied in middle school and struggles with her self-esteem as a result, but everyone in her class just coddles her, and that pretty much drains the tension in this anime entirely, because apparently everyone is in this girl's corner already. So why am I watching? On a mechanical level, this anime is fine. Like JC Staff, you guys have been solid lately, but I feel like the characters aren't as expressive as they could be. Most have about 2 expressions total, so it does kinda look pretty stiff. But again, what was with the theme that the background art is getting more attention than everything else? It's like 3 shows so far this season. Why? I honestly expected this series to be better than it was. The adaptation here just feels like a fairly bog-standard shoujo adaptation, despite having the makings for something that could have been pretty great. But at the end of the day, it is still a decent romance anime, so if you're a fan of those, check it out. Maybe my middling picks this season are more just a list of regrets, because Guild Receptionist was yet another squandered potential. Okay, so an OP pro-tag fantasy series with adventures, dungeon delving, quests, skills, and guilds, but with the gimmick that the main character is a receptionist who moonlights as a badass adventurer, clearing dungeons no one else can to put an end to her overtime. At least that's a quirky enough gimmick to get my attention in the first place. Unfortunately though, it gives up on that after just a few episodes, as we're beat over the head with some plot about dark gods killing people to unlock more powerful skills, and end the human race. And who can stop them? Obviously our girl, after she gets pulled from her desk work through the power of managerial abuse and blossoming romantic feelings. Yeah, surprise, rips mask off. It was an OP pro-tag fantasy series all along. Just insert jokes about hating overtime. Cool. And the thing is, Elena, Jade, and their teammates are actually pretty fun characters. Like, the people in this series are a highlight, the lore has some potential, and even an overarching plot that ties the arcs together. But all of that is undercut by the most mid-action and cliches, and it drains all of my excitement. Cloverworks, I'm embarrassed for you. Not because of your work on this series, mind you. For what this is, it looks pretty good. And that's saying something because I can definitely tell they phoned this in. No, I'm embarrassed they had to work on this and not something better. Like, I don't know, Bocchi the Rock's 2nd season. When's that coming, huh? Still waiting on it. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. You want a somewhat novel fantasy anime? Sure, pick this up. Just don't go in expecting anything revolutionary. There actually wasn't a doubt in my mind that the Red Ranger becomes an adventurer in another world would just be mid from the outset, but that's not to say it isn't enjoyable. In terms of its premise, it's a lot of fun, smashing together 2 genres in a way that play off their strong suits. Yeah, you still have your typical isekai fantasy nonsense, but now we're throwing in the ad hoc power set of a Sentai Ranger, and you get a love letter to both Sentai and isekai. This anime has just the right amount of cheese that makes for a lighthearted, but still engaging experience overall, even if the stakes for it never feel tangible. I found the comedy in this worked pretty well, by juxtaposing the mismatch in character expectations and cliches from both isekai and Sentai in a pretty clever way. But I am burying the lead a bit. Why the hell did I just claim it's mid if I'm praising the hell out of this anime? Well, it's because this series never grows past its premise. At the end of the day, despite all of the interesting elements, it's still a straightforward isekai plotline, just with a Sentai character as a protagonist. Red never really stops feeling like a tacked-on visitor to this world. As for the art and animation, it could have done better. It's not the worst out there, but there's plenty of shows I enjoyed less this season that had more competently done action and cinematography. That would have made this a much more enjoyable watch than relying on the novelty of a Red Ranger in a fantasy world to carry it. And that's pretty much my issue. If this had managed to move past the novelty, I definitely would have rated it higher. Alright, on to the bad. And holy hell, were there some shows that fucking sucked this season. Usually this section just kinda falls into place as anime I didn't enjoy nearly as much, or was bored as hell watching to the point I didn't even finish. But this time around, they exemplified my sucked on multiple fronts criteria, be it story, animation, or pacing. Pretty much all of these failed on every front. Beihei Neko, the elf girl's cat, is secretly an S-ranked pussy magnet, crams so much unnecessary fetish crap into an otherwise boring package. Not only is there a ton of gratuitous ecchi fan service, but why the hell does the main character who, let me remind you, looks like an actual kitten, get a goddamn harem? I'm not joking when I say every single girl in this show wants to fuck this cat. And like, that's just treated as the most normal thing in the world. He even gets a skill that makes pregnancy between species possible. Now it's not used, but he does get it. Yeah, this isn't subtle. So if a titty anime with a romance closer to bestiality than xenophilia isn't an immediate turnoff for you, the story, setting, and characters won't salvage it. Generic fantasy world with evil demons trying to destroy humanity. Her main character elf was saved by another elf I couldn't even tell it wasn't her at first. Fantasy anime with a fetishistic positive slavery depiction. And that's all on top of the usual tropes we associate with the genre. Tack on an arbitrary skill system that doesn't serve a narrative purpose, and we're already really deep into bad anime territory. But hell, while we're here, let's go for the fucking jugular, huh? We have a big-tittied horny elf lead, a horny big-tittied pun-spewing cat girl, horny big-tittied rough-speaking reincarnated dragon girl who only cares about food, fighting, and fucking, and then two oblivious fairy girls who just tag along for shits and giggles. Yeah, their personalities are more defined by their dialogue quirks than actions, so don't even bother learning their names. Are you wondering if the animation is a saving grace? Let me put those fears to rest. It's shit. Overdesigned characters, stiff action, a ton of recycled shots, making for a visually bland experience. Minor gripe, what the fuck is this armor even protecting? Like, this is a joke, right? Whatever. Beihei Neko sucked, and it's because it didn't have ambition. Just another horny fantasy series in an already oversaturated market. So, skip it. Bogus skilled fruit master is an obvious sort of bad, but more in a fun way. This anime was beyond dumb, in both premise and execution, but it's also aware of how stupid it is. Now that little fact doesn't stop the series from trying and failing miserably at having stakes and tension, but it's also intentionally undercutting that with bad gags, so at least it's doing it on purpose. My issues with this one are the setting, power system, and characters are all uncanny stereotypes that come across as a symptom of bad writing. Like, I'm not joking, characters are literally named after traits they have, or just have no depth beyond their service to the plot. The power scaling is all over the place, so I have no clue what a credible threat even looks like. And probably the biggest sin in this anime was just how little happened in 12 episodes. The first 3 are just build-up, which, that's expected. But the subsequent arcs all felt disjointed and stuck together by tape and a prayer. Missing adventurers turns into a wild goose chase for some evil adventuring party, one that's actually led by the woman running the Adventurers Guild. But hey, let's get sidetracked from that to go get a sword for our main dude, and end up fighting a black market contact for the woman before. Looping around to, oh look, the evil girl from the previous arc is actually not so bad, and now she's helping out. Yeah, can't have any waifu looking bad now, can we? This just reeks of poorly edited web serialization. Things just happen without really flowing into one another, and sadly, the animation was the best part. Yeah, don't take that as praise. It's not good, it's just passable. No one's gonna remember this series after a few weeks. That's probably for the best. Yeah, it's weird that there were 2 fantasy anime with incredibly uncomfortable romances out this season, and surprise, both were garbage. Magic Maker essentially tried to do the incest route, got cold feet halfway through, but you can't just go back on that. I mean, you've already played your hand. The writer here was very much down with that idea before the audience and characters knew they weren't related by blood. So you're not getting away from that. That's still a pretty big problem, but I digress. A fantasy isekai without magic or bullshit skills where humans have to live by their adaptability and strength sounds like an interesting take on the genre, especially since the protagonist discovers magic from the ground up. And cool, it's physics-based, not just some magical energy that gets power through words. That's a super interesting premise. So how does it capitalize on that? That's the trick. It doesn't. The first half of this anime boils down to pure experimentation to figure magic out, but less visual and researching nature to make breakthroughs, and more something blows up in his face, then we cut to a chibi scene where he just explains what happened to the audience. That's lazy. And the closest I got to a sense that this dude was actually making progress was when he realized he wasn't dealing with magical energy directly, but magic-infused air. So really, this anime started off okay, and then fell off a damn cliff in terms of writing. I was even impressed at first with how disturbing their take on goblins were, until later episodes just go with a more typical appearance. Yeah, I'm sure if I wanted to come up with a justification, the dude's older and he doesn't find them as scary, so they're just not as scary, right? That's giving this way too much credit, considering newer and scarier monsters later on don't pack that same punch. Basically, they did a good amount of build-up, and then killed the monster vibe for these creatures early on. As for animation, Studio Dean, another failed fantasy anime. Between this, Banished Former Hero, and Remonster, you've been dropping the ball. Now, most of the drawn stuff here looks fine, but the CG is definitely out of place. So what elements this series does well were squandered early on. That's why I'm saying it's not worth a look. I sadly had some expectations for middle-aged online shopper after the first episode. Like, the animation wasn't great and the story had been done to death, but it still had a pretty competently put together first episode that I was hoping would be a slightly underrated gem. You know, bad presentation, but overall okay story. I was wrong. The animation already wasn't good from the start, and it falls apart quickly after just a few episodes, swiftly devolving into a slideshow with comically bad editing that makes tense action scenes feel like a joke, alongside art that most amateurs would be embarrassed to post online, let alone in a finished anime, which probably would have been forgivable had the actual plot or story had a redeeming factor. But it didn't. Yeah, I'm getting a little tired of the merchant isekai genre at this point. It has plenty of good examples already, so those that fail stand out as being really fucking bad. I can only see a guy introduce Japanese cooking, little knickknacks, and revolutionizing transportation in a medieval fantasy world so many times before it gets dull. The pacing was a nightmare here as well, because characters were just thrown at us, and an overarching story is completely non-existent. It also never really nailed that slice of life vibe either, so what little bit of spice did this add? Catgirl waifus. Not just one, but two. Yeah, this is another shitty anime this season that had hot young women, sometimes too young mind you, throwing themselves at a middle-aged man with plenty of TNA to go around. And it's not just a single character, it's literally every single girl in this anime does it. I won't even say eligible, one of them's fucking married. It's to the point it's practically a running gag that this dude gets so much puss, his actual love interest just kind of expected. So horny and bland. We've heard that before. Yeah, skip it. Ubel Blood actually improved as it went on, but not by much. I wouldn't say I'm super big into dark fantasy. I like the genre, but I'm not an enthusiast. But this anime really falls flat, and not because it's edgy. Honestly, it's even pretty tame on that front. No, the primary issue holding this one back was the terminal habit of not explaining or establishing a single fucking aspect of its character, setting, or world. Terms are just dropped on the audience haphazardly, characters are mentioned and introduced without any weight given to their significance to the story. After 12 episodes, I'm not even sure what the powers are in this world, or like, what the hell even happened that led us to this point. Well, besides the main dude was betrayed by his friends. That's pretty damn obvious. He doesn't shut the fuck up about it. But I didn't realize that the mid-show antagonist wasn't like the main bad guy who betrayed him until after he was dead. That's pretty fucking bad. Look, I'm sure the manga tells this story better, but after this entire run, I can't tell you a damn thing about this world or why it is the way it is. And that's a pretty big failing when the main dude's motivation is basically getting revenge for how fucked up his life and the world are. So that said, it's hard to follow. But the animation doesn't really do it any favors either. I mean, it's Satelight, a studio that's notorious for pushing out poorly animated slop. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty pissed off the background art got more attention than any of the animation or script. That is when it's not taking place in a generic Stonewall dungeon. You want a dark fantasy? Berserk. Go watch that. That's about all I got for you. This isn't it. So that's it. Winter 2025 was honestly a pretty disappointing start to the year. Most of what I really liked were just continuations of previous series I already enjoyed a ton, and what was new either didn't stand out or failed miserably. But hey, here's hoping that can change in spring. You can support me on Patreon or through YouTube memberships to vote on what I watch next season. Whether you do or not, be sure to tell me your thoughts on Winter down below. What shows did you like or can't believe I didn't even watch? I'd love to hear them. For now though, hey, you've made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. You can also join my Discord with the link down in the description. And if you really want to support me, you can head on over to my Patreon and pick up some extra perks. Or hey, you can do that through channel memberships too. Speaking of supporters, I'd like to give a special thanks to Autumn Stott, JMonth33A, Pokeflute, Robin DBL, Tristan, and Vonstrom for their continued support. Thanks for watching.